You watch the movies, think you're going to trade stocks and become a bazillionaire. With anything, there always is a little bit of luck. It's also that it does require a level of subject matter expertise. We don't just say, we're going to invest in this and this is the return. We're going to invest in this and this is the reason why.
Hey, investor, welcome back. Passive Income Adventures, where the show that talks about what we do. We want you to go on more adventures. We want you to figure out how to pay for it with income. And we want you to figure out how to pay for it with time, which is the passive part. So today we have Joe Shimizzi, a commercial real estate investor, calling in about medical office space, retail, and giving us a perspective on buying commercial real estate for passive income. So we have more time to go on more adventures. Thanks, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling from Michigan, a city called Novi, N-O-V-I. So it's about 30 miles outside of Detroit. It's a beautiful metropolitan area, snugged in between Ann Arbor and Detroit.
Yeah, great area to be investing over the last 10 years or so. Lots of deals to be made there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm really interested in talking to you about today because we do have a lot of multifamily syndicators coming on the show. And one of the things that we really beat the drum on passive income is you don't have to be an expert to invest passively in things,
Mhm.
but you should be diversified if you're not an expert. And so I'm looking at talking to people who are investing in a wide variety of things because I'm a multifamily syndicator and hard money lender. And I tend to have a little bit overloaded in my network of people doing similar things to me. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you today because we personally are not doing any medical space investing right now. And we're
Mhm.
not personally doing any retail investing right now. And I
Mhm.
think that medical has a great reputation, but I'm curious. I'm really looking forward to hearing retail because retail has a bad reputation. And
Mhm.
so, where it's ripe for opportunity, maybe repositioning, where the value is there. So, kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you started, how you got into this. Show us when we get to the part where we're talking about the commercial real estate investing, the medical and the retail, what makes you an expert in this space? So lead us up to that point.
Sure, absolutely. Ever since I graduated from college, I did graduate with a finance degree. And I love the concept of finance. In my teens, when I chose the degree specialty I wanted to go in, like most people who get a finance degree, they think they're going to go or want to go into Wall Street. And we watch the movies and think you're going to trade stocks and become a bazillionaire. I did not do that. Naturally, I got out of school and went to Michigan State University, got a finance degree and loved it. I loved everything finance. When I had graduated, I actually got into the medical field. I got in by accident somewhat. My dad owned a medical related company that I was fortunate enough to be able to join. About 6 or 9 months after I graduated in my early 20s, I saw an opportunity in fearless young 20-year-old or 20 something year old in my younger 20s, fearless with unlimited energy and very naive. But I think that worked to my benefit because he was kind enough to say, yeah, as long as you're doing what I'm paying you to do, you can do whatever you want in the off hours and use my office to do it. And I was able to start a business in the medical field on the backs of his business at the time
Hmm.
and just was working tirelessly. And that's where my entrepreneurial journey started. I had just turned 22 years old. I had a half-time employee that worked 3 or 4 hours a day at the most. And I was working in the evening. And before I knew it, it just continued to grow and continued to grow. About a year after I had graduated, so about 6 or 9 months after I had started the business, I had kindly told my dad that I was going to really go down this journey. And he was very supportive of me doing it. And
Nice.
I was very thankful for that because the business just continued to grow and grow. And that's where my entrepreneurial journey started. But synonymous with that and in parallel with that time frame, that's where my passion for real estate also started too. And the reason was, again, being naive and a young 20-something-year-old, I was signing leases, personally guaranteeing them, not smart enough to have an attorney review a lease. And my business was growing and
Yeah.
2,000 square feet needed to become 4,000 square feet, needed to become 10,000 square feet. And I was finding myself paying to break leases. And finally, as at a financial standpoint, personally, where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to buy my own small building. And that way I can control my own destiny for purposes of, as my business continues to grow, I'm paying myself in rent, which is great. I'm controlling my own destiny from my business perspective, which I was fortunate to be able to do. And then the real estate bug really got me even more when I had grown out of the building that I had just
Mm.
purchased because I panicked. I don't have room. And now I've got a 100% vacant building. What do I do with it? I've got a promissory note I have to pay, but I need to go somewhere else to support my growing business because I can't fit in that business anymore. And luck had it that I was able to lease that building relatively quickly. And I'm like, wow, it's nice getting a coupon every month. It's nice getting that additional passive income from working my butt off in my active role, in my active business. And I'm getting this passive income from this smaller building that I have. And I just wouldn't use it. I just would put it away, let it accumulate. And then I went and bought another building. So my journey was really started entrepreneurially from the standpoint of starting businesses, but the real estate passion that I have and that I continue to have really was born from my entrepreneurial journey and the businesses that I own and have owned historically. And every business that I've owned since that time has been in a location that I've owned the building and I've owned the property. And it was passive income here and passive income there for businesses owned, paying rent. And then about 10 or 11 years ago, I really wanted to go much more into real estate. So I really did deep dive into the Michigan market, and I invested very actively for purposes of passive income in building my own real estate portfolio, particularly in the medical office area, a
Mhm.
little bit in the inline retail, but particularly in the medical office. And I get this question all the time: why medical office? It's because it's what I knew the medical field. I knew enough to be dangerous, and I understood the idiosyncratic things that are very different from, for example, medical office and general office. And that's really why I really had focused on the medical office real estate, was because it's what I knew. Now, 10, 11, 12 years later, it was a great asset class because it's not totally recession proof, but it's definitely recession resistant, and it allows for long-term passive income. These medical office users are long-term lessees. They come in and they stay. Doctors and medical providers don't like to move. They're making huge investments in their space, and it's very difficult for them to uproot their locations. It's difficult for them, and it's also difficult for their patient populations. I found it to be a wonderful space to invest in for purposes of passive income.
Yeah, and I hate it when I make a doctor appointment, I show up at their old office,
Yeah.
sitting there in
Yeah.
the parking
Very
lot like,
true. Yeah.
"Where am I supposed to be going?" "Oh, we've
Mm.
moved. Now you're
Yeah.
gonna be 20 minutes late." So,
That's
yeah,
right.
that long-term type of thing, and that can't be underestimated, especially what we saw during the pandemic.
Hmm.
Not only are they long-term tenants, but they're open no matter
Hmm.
what's
Yeah.
going on in
That's
the
true.
world, they are
Hmm.
open, and I
Yeah.
think that's one of the reasons I like multifamily is because no matter what's going on in the world, people still need a place to live. People
Uh-huh.
talk about the stability of things like self-storage or retail, but I think if you're gonna look at the sectors that are gonna be open no matter what, medical and where people live are really the top of the line there. I had the same kind of thing. I was when I first starting my business, my real estate business, it was specifically I was wholesaling properties and doing creative financing deals, things
Hmm.
like that. And I thought, "Oh, I need an office so I can invite my potential customers in and have a professional place to talk to them." And so I went around and I started looking at leases
Hmm.
and thinking, why not just rent a building? And I immediately realized I'm just not cut out for renting. I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe I should buy a whole building and
Hmm.
just house hack my little tiny portion and then rent out the rest. Maybe I should build a building. And so I
Hmm.
just started calling on everything I could find with the office space. And I ended up not ever doing it because I ended up down the path of multifamily and private lending instead. But it was just such an interesting journey to just research and looking into all of these options and thinking maybe someday I'll get into this. So you really stumbled into it in a way, but at the same time, it's like you took what you knew, what your
Hmm.
dad was doing,
Hmm.
what you were doing, and really stayed in your lane and developed this into something different, but related. And we talk
Hmm.
a lot about on this show the skills that you have for one thing, you can transfer over to a new thing. How much of that was by effort? I need to figure out how to do this thing similar to what I'm doing, or how much of that was, like you said, lucky or fortunate, falling into it or just taking the next small logical step?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. I think with anything, there always is a little bit of luck. I was primed up and ready to go, at least financially, I was from the standpoint of starting to really actively invest in medical office real estate,
Mhm.
coming off the heels of the 2008 9 financial crisis. And that was not purposeful. I wish I could say I did it because I was intelligent or smart. It's not. It just was the timing thing, and which is a luck thing, because your price point, there was a lot of deal opportunities there, and you were getting into, or at least you had the opportunity to get into deal points at a relatively lower level, particularly when you were looking at distressed assets. And that's really what I was hyper focused on at that time, because that whole financial crisis shook everybody at its core, particularly those who were in real estate. My portfolio back then was quite small, and I was very conservative in my investments, thankfully. So I did not feel the ripples that many real estate investors have, or
Mhm.
had, I should say. But the benefit to me and the luck, I think, really came from the fact that I was able to deploy capital directly into distressed assets that were not financeable or not lender worthy. but being able to fully capitalize them and then start to build the value over time as we started to come out of that kind of real estate recession in '08 and '09 and in 2010. So that piece of it, I think, was fortunate and lucky. And I attribute luck to that from that aspect. But I think the knowledge based thing and what I had learned over the period of time was how the medical office space works and how medical providers think and how healthcare systems work and how they think. Even in the last 10 or 12 years, more like 13, 14 years, even that has transformed a lot. But I think that my knowledge base from the businesses that I've owned in the medical field has given me a good foundation to be able to really understand the idiosyncratic ways of thought processes in the medical office field. And it's not just when people think of medical office, I think what they ultimately think of is your single dental practice or your single family practitioner who's been in practice for 40 years and treats everybody from grandma and grandpa all the way to the teenage grandson.
Hmm.
Medicine isn't that way anymore, which means medical offices aren't that way anymore. When really has been the last time somebody who lives in a metropolitan area goes into that single practitioner office? Those don't exist really. Maybe in the more rural areas they do, but in major metropolitan areas, those don't exist anymore. They're multi-specialty groups, shared lobbies now. You see dental practices that may have 6 or 8 doctors, or family medicine or internal medicine practices that have 10 or 12 doctors with 20,000 square feet and are affiliated with a large healthcare system.
Right.
So that has given me, I believe, some great institutional knowledge to parlay into the real estate space and really understanding what that market needs and what that market wants for their medical office. And I think that the nice thing with medical office isn't just the standpoint of it has a tendency to be more stable and not necessarily recession proof, but a little bit more recession resistant.
Mhm.
It's also that it does require a level of subject matter expertise. You really do have to understand the differences in the specialties and what those specialties need. Cardiology specialist needs something very different than dermatology specialist that needs something very different than internal medicine practices. And something very different for ASCs or ambulatory surgery centers. So that level of expertise has to go well beyond someone's level of expertise in real estate. Somebody can be a wonderful real estate professional, but to be able to get into medical office, it does require a little bit more of an enhanced level of understanding to really understand what products do or don't work, what property locations do or don't work, and what repositioning opportunities may or may not work.
Okay, so it's not just like an empty box and then
No.
tenant built to suit. So are you saying that different office spaces, whether they're already built out or they're not already built out, how does that differ between who you're going to market it to and how
Yeah.
if somebody's actually
Yeah.
going to come and rent this building?
Yeah. That's a great question. One thing that COVID did, I mean, I'm going to use COVID as an example because in my professional career in real estate, this is the first time that I've ever really seen it to this degree. One thing that COVID did, obviously, to the general office market is it really paralyzed them because people didn't know if and when employees were going to come back to work, to what degree, to what magnitude. In the hybrid work model, you see the work from home work model, and you're seeing big corporations like JP Morgan and Amazon saying, no, you guys have to get back to the office because productivity is not there. But one thing that Continuum has done since COVID has ended, quote unquote, is that it really paralyzed that general office market. But
Mm.
what it has also done to the medical office, my very strong opinion, and I think I've been successful thus far in being able to do it, is it entered into the market opportunities for repositioned assets for purposes of medical office use. Because
Mhm.
you have a lot of vacancies or a lot of buildings who sit largely vacant in major metropolitan areas or even moderately sized metropolitan areas that are wonderfully located and have wonderful bones and structures that will not likely ever be able to be at a level of occupancy in the general office market because that market has changed. And I know that there's still a lot that still has to be decided and the future will dictate that. But for medical office, what it did, particularly at a time where we're in an inflationary period, right? Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years in a post-COVID world, materials were extremely expensive to build and go ground up. So it
Yeah.
paralyzed, much like it paralyzed the housing market, it also paralyzed new build construction. But what it did for medical office investors is it gave a lower price point to reposition assets for purposes of medical office use. Instead of going ground up on a 40,000 square foot or a 60,000 square foot medical office, where your price points were going to be so high to go vertical that your rent would be priced out of the market and not entice medical office users to go into that first generation space. It gave investors, particularly value add investors like me, the opportunity to take a look at existing product that already had the bones and the structures and the nervous system in place, as long as it met certain criteria, to be able to reposition that asset at a much lower price point, to be able to, in essence, give medical office users what is the equivalent of first generation space for a much lower price point.
Mm,
And what the experience it gave me and the experience I've had in doing that is it made my assets and my fund's assets very competitive. When you're going out into the market and you have a medical provider or a medical office group or a healthcare system looking to lease 20 or 30,000 square feet at a price point that's 30 to 40% cheaper on a per square foot basis than new first generation vertical build. I think it has been tremendously beneficial for some asset classes, medical office being one of them. I would say predominantly beneficial to the medical office space because we're able to continue the momentum of being able to offer good first generation like space to the medical office community without the exorbitant rental rates that are needed for medical office space just because it's so capital intensive.
yeah. It makes a lot more sense that way. In the multifamily space, people are talking about picking up general office space or even office towers and converting them to
Hmm.
luxury housing, multifamily
Hmm.
housing. And I've watched a lot of those projects fail over
Hmm.
the last couple of years. It
Hmm.
just makes a lot more sense to convert an office building to just a more specialized type of office building. It
Hmm.
from a logistics standpoint, from a cost standpoint, it just makes more sense location wise. I don't know. It just fits in better. It's kind of like converting a hotel into multifamily. I think that actually, while the economics of that often are not very good, but the
Right.
use case at least
Hmm.
makes more sense. So I see what you're referring to and how that conversion tends to make more sense. Do you do any general office investing when you see like a smoking deal? Because if you're looking at it to buy, do you ever look at it and just keeping it as general office or you're like, I don't mess in that space?
Yeah, I don't really mess in that space. I may have a general office user in a medical office building per se,
Mm,
but any medical office building that is in the portfolio is a minimum of 75% medical office use.
okay. Okay.
And there may be a general officer, there may be a medical related business that's a general office use, but they
Mhm.
want to be in a medical office building. But I want to touch on something that you had said. I'm not a multifamily investor and I'm not going to pretend to be one because I'm not, and I wouldn't be good at it. But I can see the nexus between a hotel transitioning into or being repositioned. I can see the nexus between those and the connection there. But with general office, it's different because you have to have very specific criteria in a general
Mhm.
office structure for it to even make sense to even think about converting it to medical office because you have to have certain ceiling heights. You got to have certain
Mm,
mechanical systems in place. You got to have certain things electrified appropriately. You got to have enough power to the space. And the big thing you have to have is you got to have a different parking ratio. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people where they've tried to take a general
yeah.
office in a post-COVID world and they tried to reposition it to medical office.
Mhm.
And something as simply as not taking into consideration the parking demands
Okay.
completely makes them fail, right?
Okay.
Their intentions were good. The location is wonderful. I could argue the building was even great, the infrastructure of it. But if you don't have the parking for it, you're not getting your approvals. And quite frankly, without approvals or without parking, guess what? You're not going to get. You're not going to get any occupancy demand.
Yeah.
So you really have to have a level of understanding in the medical office space to really understand what makes sense. It's not just its location and everything else that comes with it.
Yeah. That's a good point because let's just take the multifamily analogy again. I'll see a building come through and they'll say, we've got a 60-40 mix of studios and one bedroom apartments. You're in the suburbs. This is
Hmm.
nobody wants that product. And
Right.
you're going to
Hmm.
struggle with occupancy the entire
Hmm.
time. But then I'll see something with two bedrooms downtown. And I'm like, this is a really old building when this wasn't downtown, when
Hmm.
the east
Right.
suburbs. And
Right.
it really is due for a retrofit. So sometimes there's just a mismatch of location to the product. And I hear you saying the same thing. If you don't know what you're doing, you go, oh, general office, that's going to make a great medical office building transition because medical is hot right now and general is
Hmm.
out. But if you don't have that specialized knowledge, then you can get burned. It's the same in development. We saw this with a new project where we'd underwritten all of our numbers, but when our geotech came back, we needed this very extensive foundation and
Hmm.
basement waterproofing. The water table was too high. There was too much sand. that changed the economics on the building tremendously. And so those
Sure.
little kinds of details that you just are not gonna see if you're a newcomer to the space. And so, yeah,
Right.
that specialty that you're talking about, do you feel like your investors get that or respect that, or maybe even the people who don't invest with you, that they don't understand, like, how important that is that you're getting this space?
I think so. And the reason is overwhelmingly because we explain it. We don't just say, we're going to invest in this and this is the return.
Mhm.
We're going to invest in this and this is the reason why. This is our investment thesis for this particular asset that we're investing in. And this is what we need to do to meet these particular financial metrics. And the reason why it's going to take us from A to Z to get there is because we have to do B through Y to get it done. And we do take a lot of time explaining how the sausage gets made, for lack of a better word. Really, how is it that we're doing what we're doing? But not just how, but the reason why. I know if I'm sitting in that chair, I don't want to know how. I do want to know how, but I really want to know why. I want to know
Mm.
the rationale and the thesis as to why this capital is being used and for what reason. And, in every single deal bar none that we do, if it is in the fund, my capital firm is investing as a passive investor to a sizable degree right alongside them. My interest in the fund's interests are very much in sync 100% of the time. I think that's very important because to be able to be excited about a deal because you see it and then not being able to put your money where your mouth is, in my personal opinion, I would be concerned about that because I want people to feel comfortable with not just what we are doing, but also the reason why we're doing it. And we're so confident in that investment thesis for that particular asset that we're going to put a sizable amount of capital into that deal right alongside you as a limited partner. And we have every invested interest in not just preserving our own capital position in it, but also for that of the fund. And we feel very confident in our ability to execute when we do that.
This is where experience really matters because you can look at a beautiful pitch deck and somebody saying, oh, well, it has the right mechanicals, it's a great location. The investor, because you don't need to be a specialist to be a limited partner, you need to know that the person you're investing with is a
Mm-hmm.
specialist. And you won't
Hmm.
know that got missed when they're looking in the pitch deck because you're
Hmm.
not the expert, but
Right.
you don't know that the person you're investing with is also not an
Hmm.
expert. And so that
Right.
experience, that's why they say location, but honestly, when you're a limited partner experience, how many times have they made this particular sausage recipe?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
what do they know about it? Do they have it memorized? Can they do it in their sleep? Like, that
Hmm.
kind of stuff means that you've got a rinse and repeat systems-driven business model where you can really niche down and focus on this thing and all the ins and outs and details. Like, there's just no replacing that level of experience. So how do you communicate that to your investors? Like, we're the people here
Hmm.
in the Detroit area or some of the other markets you may be in. We are the experts, and here's why.
Hmm. It's largely based on other deals we've done. No deal based on our, so predominantly, not all of our investments, but a large number of our investments are either value add and or repositioned assets. So we're either
Okay.
going in and injecting capital for purposes of adding value for a variety of reasons in the medical office space, or we're repositioning an asset like maybe a general office purpose building that maybe has a sprinkling of medical office and
Mhm.
completely reposition it for purposes of medical office. Now, your question is, how do we explain to investor leads or investors why that works? Each one is very specific. So what we often do, or what we always do, I should say, is we explain what we've done in other assets, right? Now, asset A, B, and C, which are done and closed, have been very successful, will have a very different investment approach than the current state investment, for example. But we parlay some of those examples and some of the struggles. Maybe we learned something from investment A and we're very transparent. Look, we made a mistake in this investment A, still performed very well financially, but we're not going to do it in this current investment because of this reason. And we'll be very transparent about it. But I think the key is to really explain what your experience has been and what you have done, and then parlay that into and tie that into what you're doing for this particular investment. Because what I find, particularly in the investments we make in medical office, investors have a difficult time conceptualizing it. They see a brick and mortar building or maybe a picture of a building. They see some financials that will provide this rate of return, and they're trying to draw the connection between those two things.
Mhm.
And I think from our perspective, it's really important. And I think this is true maybe for any asset class, but I know it's definitely for medical office. It's really drawing the connection of those two things. Here's the current state. Here's the future state financial return. Those things do not happen without everything in between. And that's where our expertise comes in, being able to not just understand what to do from a repositioning asset, from a construction perspective, from a due diligence perspective, but capital structures, capital stack, capital injection, carry
Mhm.
cost. Those are all things that are really important when you're repositioning an asset. And if you don't have the experience in doing that, it can be very problematic very quick.
Yeah, I think that's what you're describing there. It's investors have to know that what you're telling them is likely to actually happen. So it's all
Hmm.
that execution in between. And I think sometimes investors are like, oh, there's this great building there. They say it's going to return this. It's never going to return what they say it's going to return. It's either going to
Right.
be more or less. It's
Right.
never going to be right
That's right.
on. And I think investors really need to understand that it's not like in private lending, when we tell you we're going to pay you 10% or 12% on a note, that's what we're going to pay you, unless
Hmm.
there's some default or something
Hmm.
like that. But most of the time, 90 plus 98% of the time, it's going to make what we say it's going to make. Whereas with private equity, it's never. You always have
That's
to
right.
think like, how can this team pull this off and hopefully do about or somewhere around where they think it's going to be? And like, how much am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? And
Hmm.
how likely am I get paid when and how much you say? And that does really boil down to the execution between the plan and the results. How did you get into the retail space in that case? I love these podcasts because I can just pretend like I just met you for the first time at a networking event and I
Sure.
get to ask lots of questions and you get to tell
Sure.
me all about yourself. So,
Sure.
as a medical, kind of starting out in that space, becoming an expert in that space, and then branching out, that always really concerns me because in the last couple of years, just listing multifamily again, it's like, hey, now I've got a car wash fund. Now I've
Yeah.
got a
Yeah.
fund that invests in some kind of other blue collar business or something like
Hmm.
that. And I think you were the multifamily expert beating the multifamily drum, right? But now
Hmm.
you've realized in your own life, you need to diversify because your multifamily is maybe not performing very well. So you're like, I'm diversifying and I'm going to start a fund doing it. I was like, there's no way you can possibly be an expert in that. You're diversifying into it on purpose because for good reason you need to. I'm
Hmm.
not saying diversification is bad. I'm just saying becoming an expert in more than one thing is really difficult. So walk me
Hmm.
through that process where you're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I can put some retail into this
Yeah.
portfolio."
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question. There's a lot more parallels between, so let me back up. You had made a comment very early on in this interview about retail not having a great
Reputation.
reputation right now.
Yeah.
Certain elements or submarkets of retail, right? Big
Mhm.
box, malls, those do not have the greatest reputation. But neighborhood retail and inline retail has the highest occupancy demands in decades, right?
Can you define that for me? Because when I think inline retail or neighborhood, I'm thinking like the old classy strip mall that has 2 nail salons, a church, and
Kind
a
of.
CPA.
Yeah. So, yeah, inline or neighborhood retail, as we define it internally, I know everyone can have different
Yeah.
definitions of it, but how we define it is approximately, and I use that in air quotes, approximately 30,000 square feet or less
Okay.
of inline retail with no big box. So there's no big anchor,
No
right?
anchor.
It's not going to be a Home Depot or a Best
Mhm.
Buy or a Kohl's or something like that. Is not the retail that we invest in. Nick, go ahead.
Oh,
Right.
alright. Is it different than, like, the newer style where we're going and it's little pad sites? So you've got, like, a Starbucks here and a separate building of Domino's. You might have 2 or 3 in a row, but it's a whole, like, a little complex of is
It could
that
be. That's not what we do have some of that in our portfolio,
uh-huh.
but overwhelmingly what we do when we talk about our investment thesis for purposes of retail is it's repositioning older aged
Okay.
retail centers,
Mhm.
right? From the 80s or 90s, where your depths of retail were 80 or 90 feet. Why?
Mhm.
Because of storage. Why?
Okay.
Because of back office space. When you see new ground up retail now, you're not seeing 90-foot depths. You're seeing 50 to 60-foot depths because the market has changed.
Mhm.
The need has changed. So when we look at inline retail, what has made historical retail, particularly neighborhood retail, successful? Location,
Yeah.
traffic counts.
Okay.
So why do we look at those? Because actually there's a lot more parallels to what we do in medical office than, quite frankly, the investment thesis we use in those types of sub asset classes for retail. For example, we had a really nice investment that yielded our investors a tremendous amount of return in a much shorter period of time in a wonderfully located retail center. And it wasn't so much the retail center that made the profit as much as it was the location and what we did, right? So it was an older retail center that was developed in the mid 80s. And by the time we were done with it, guess what? It looked like It was from the 2020s.
Okay.
And we drove rent up, but not did we just drive rent up, we recycled tenants out and brought in a much higher caliber of tenancy. But what we also did was we repositioned some of those spaces to be more conducive to the 21st century retail user,
Hmm.
which is very different than the retail user of the 1980s, where it had a barbershop, maybe not even a nail salon, but you're right, it had a barbershop, a local insurance agent, maybe a beauty salon, perhaps a nail salon and a meat market. Those don't really exist like that anymore. You've got your froyos, you've got your trendy restaurant, you've got your fast casual restaurant. You don't have a 10,000 or 12,000 square foot restaurant with 80 seats in it. You've got a fast casual restaurant that may have 6 tables and people are in and out. Those are all very different use cases and use types that we reposition neighborhood retail for to conform to,
Hmm.
using a very similar investment thesis than what we've used for the medical office. So you're right. Those are two very different asset classes. And I'm not claiming to be that we're two separate, we wear two separate expertise hats, but there's a lot of similarity, I should say, not synergy. There's a lot of similarity between how you reposition that small segment of an asset class that we do, and that's inline neighborhood retail
Hmm.
in medical office. And that's why we did it. We did it for that exact reason. The analysis is different, but the approach is the same. And that's why we've been successful in our inline neighborhood retail investments.
So I know a lot of capital raisers, when they're raising for multiple projects, they're like, I'm not an expert in any of these projects. I'm just really good at finding the experts in
Mhm.
here. And I'm like, you're almost like your medical second opinion
Mhm.
that they're putting out. Some maybe it's something where you're putting the right expert on your team, or like you have a team. I'm sure you have people who are more skilled or more versed in one versus the other. And I think that's the benefit of working with multiple people is you can tap into expertise that you can't really do if you're a smaller shop or a one man
Absolutely.
show.
Mhm.
So what does that look like in your business?
Yeah. So I'll give you a prime example. When we're doing due diligence on a general office conversion into medical office space, I have my design team, my engineering team, my architectural team, and then I have my due diligence team and financial underwriting team. That team, with no exception, is very different than the team that I have, let's hypothetically say inline retail, right?
Mhm.
Clearly, it's a different design. Clearly, it's a different engineering specialty. Clearly, it's a different architectural specialty. And my general contractors in the contracting groups that we use, very little overlap between projects that they will work on that are medical office versus projects that they will work on that are retail
Yeah.
because the specialties are so different. But the underwriting and the approach is very similar when
Mhm.
you're looking at how to reposition something into something different. So how we handle it is just based on specialization. I mean, our underwriting model, our capital stack optimization model, our architectural design and capital reserve approaches, they're completely different. It's like an apple and an orange because the asset classes are so different. So we really do take a specialized approach to each different types of asset class. We're not just looking at everything the same way, utilizing the same levels of expertise. No, they're very different expertise levels, but approaches are very similar. So we really do draw a line of demarcation between
Mhm.
retail and medical office.
Okay. That's similar to what we do. Like I was a medical multifamily syndicator, but
Mhm.
I needed to diversify. And so I found a great hard money lender and said, I want to invest with you.
Mhm.
And he said, I'm not set up to take outside investments. I'm just doing this with my own money. And I said, well, I can set you up to take outside investments.
Mhm.
And so basically what we did is we combined our businesses. He is the lending hard money expert, and I'm more on the equities multifamily side. But and most of my money that I'm making is from the lending side. And
Okay.
because of that, we basically are working well together because we're experts at different things.
Different
And so
things. Yeah.
sometimes I think that can confuse an investor. So I wanted
Sure.
to have you point out explicitly what that looks like, how that works. And to me, it works because we created a team. I don't claim to be an expert in hard money lending, although I'm learning more and more about it as
Mhm.
I invest more and work more closely with it. But that's definitely not my core competency, but I feel at least competent enough to invest a lot of money in it. My favorite part of the show is when we get a little bit personal and find out like what your own motivations are, what your own passive income adventure dreams and goals are. Like, why do you do what you do and where do you see going? Because while we talk a lot about business and work on this show, like really it all just boils down to humans and how we want to spend our own time with our own special loved ones, who we spend time with, where we spend that time, how much we can afford to take the time away from the business, how much we can
Mhm.
afford to go do fun adventures and balancing that business and personal and For me, the way I do it is I blur the lines between the two. We're bringing family with us, we're working from home, or we're traveling somewhere where we're going to work and bringing the kids. So there's a lot of that blending. But what does that look like in your personal life? What you're doing right now to enjoy some adventures and how you plan in the future for your own passive income lifestyle?
Sure. So I said a little bit earlier, I caught the bug or got bit by the bug on passive income after that first
Mhm.
building that I had purchased that I had occupied. And then I had to suddenly vacate it because I'd outgrown it. And I was very fortunate, like I'd indicated, because I was able to, fill up that building without much downtime. And then all of a sudden I was just getting coupons. Gosh, this is great. I was more worried about just making sure I could cover my debt. I wasn't really
Yeah.
thinking, or at least I was thinking, but I was hoping to be able to get something out of it. But
Yeah.
what I was able to get out of it was enough to really pique my interest in going, geez, I'm just getting this check every month and this is just
Yeah.
great. I mean, that was in my 20s. And now fast forward, I'm in my 40s. Your thought process changes a little bit, right? You're on the other side of the hill now. At least I
Oh,
am.
no, we're not over the hill.
I am. You don't look like you are, but I am.
50 is the new 40, come
Yeah,
on.
that's right. Okay. I'm going to stick to that. So maybe I'm on the apex of the hill then,
Yeah,
but
there
I'm definitely going to
you
be
got
on
a
the other
good
side
view
of the
from
hill.
there.
So I really starts to transform into, at least my mindset has really transformed into passive income stream is great. I love being an entrepreneur. I love it. It is something that I've learned so much from and love to work. But at the end of the day, the realization is when you're on the other end of that hill, when you're on the downstroke of that hill, you would like the comfort level of passive income because you want to be able to dictate what your schedule is. And quite frankly, I would argue what your lifestyle is and what
Control
you're
your
willing
own
to
destiny.
and control your own destiny. When I was in my 20s, particularly, I was unwed at the time, not married yet. I didn't have any kids at the time. My time was mine.
Mhm.
I could do what I wanted, how I wanted, when I wanted. And quite frankly, for me in my 20s, it was work. That's all I did 24/7. And that was my choice. And I was very happy that I did it. But now that I'm a little bit older, and like I said, jokingly, I'm on the other end of that hill, I want to be able to do what I want, when I want, how I want, because I financially can. And I
Yeah.
think passive income is truly a very key component of that. And I think that when you have a passive income stream that you can continue to grow, whether you're growing it organically or through your active income stream, like many of my entrepreneur investors do, their logic is very similar, if not identical to mine. They point or the horizon or the light at the end of the tunnel where they're saying, I want to continue to build my passive income stream so that one day when I'm not a ball and chain to my business that I own, to continue the momentum of being able to enjoy the same lifestyle that I had when I was working 12 hours a day, but I'll be able to do it on the other end of the hill. I want to be able to travel with my kids or my grandkids or my wife or spouse, whatever it may be. So that's really the journey for me. I really love the real estate space. I really have historically loved being an entrepreneur. I was very fortunate to have a marriage of the two over a period of time. But at this point in my career, I think I can relate to entrepreneurs because I am one and have been one, and particularly ones that invest. They feel the same way, or at least many of them do feel the same way I do in terms of passive income stream as you get older, not just as gives you the financial wealth creation that you're seeking, but also it gives you a lifestyle that you want to be able to continue to maintain. And I don't just mean financial lifestyle, but also just your normal everyday lifestyle and prioritize things that are very different in your 50s and 60s than they were in your 20s and 30s.
I love being an entrepreneur, but I've said on the show many times, like, I'm actually more of an investor profile personality than an entrepreneur. Like, I don't want to be an entrepreneur who puts in 50, 60, 70-hour weeks. I want to be an entrepreneur who puts in like 20.
Yeah, sure.
So definitely lifestyle business. And I think that that passive income is what has allowed us to be able to make that choice of how and when we work, how much we work, like really having control over how much money we want to make and the trade-off for how much time we're going to spend doing that.
Mhm.
So thinking about like highest and best use, like how much money can I make in the least amount of time? But at the same time, it's like if you don't work at all, you turn into we've all been there when we're not working enough or when we take a vacation thinking we're really going to enjoy this beach for 2 weeks and we
Yeah,
are in trouble because we're getting on our laptops and our loved
that's
ones
right.
are like, I thought you weren't working on this trip. I'm like, I don't even know why I brought the laptop.
Yes, that's right.
Having options, having freedom, and being able to decide like how you're going to spend your time and where that income is going to fall, the trade-offs that you're willing to make. That's really where the freedom is. If you had to quit, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get this question a lot. I get this question from people much younger than me. Why do I need to worry about passive income? I'm in my 20s or my 30s. To me, and this is my experience, it's like a snowball. Your passive income can grow over time. They tell you
Like
invest in
compounding.
your IRA, for example,
Yes.
when you're very young, because it can grow tax deferred. And there's all these Warren Buffett statistics and financial expert statistics on the benefit of being able to do that and the compound rate of return. This is very similar in my opinion. The earlier you invest in passive income, the easier it is for you to forecast your financial and lifestyle destiny when you're on that other end of the hill. And I encourage even my own kids, they're still teenagers, but even my own kids, I say, look, when you have enough to invest passively, whether you're in college or when you're out of college in a professional, do it because you won't regret it.
Yeah.
It may be a little bit hard at the beginning and you may go, geez, I'm not seeing much right up front. And I don't really want to take 20,000 or 25,000 or 50,000, whatever it is to do it. Long term, it really sets you up to be able to control your own destiny at a point in your life when you want to be able to control it more than you think you do in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some kids who need to put a little bit more on the investing side, and I have some who need to put a little bit less. It's, hey,
Sure.
you're a teenager, you
Yeah.
should enjoy your life a little bit. So it's
Uh-huh.
really being able to make that personal judgment call of how much you want to sacrifice for the future and how much you want to enjoy right now. And having the freedom to be able to do both well, oh, that's really when you hit the sweet
That's
spot.
right.
Joe, who should reach out to you after the show? Like, who is your ideal contact that should talk to you and have a conversation with you?
Yeah. So the vast majority of our investor clients and investor partners, entrepreneurs, self-employed individuals who are seeking a form of taking that active income that they're getting by the business that they own and the business that they run and investing it passively for the future. We also really attract a lot of medical provider investors. And that's just because we're in the medical office space and they can relate to that and they get it. Like anything, they're a creature of habit like we all are. They want to invest and put their money in things that they understand and they can
Mhm.
understand the
That's
medical
the
office
thing.
space. They may
That's
not be
the
able to
thing.
understand multifamily or they may not be able to understand self-storage. But one thing they can do is they can walk into a medical office and it's familiar to them. And because it's familiar to them, we have those two investor profiles for us are by far the largest investor profiles. And that ranges anywhere from their early 20s all the way to their 70s and
Yeah.
everything in between.
Yeah. Awesome. How do they get in touch with you?
Sure. So LinkedIn, we have our corporate page on LinkedIn, which is Acquire a Capital, which is ACQUIRA Capital. And then our website, you can download a whole plethora of information. We're in the process of actually enhancing it with a whole dearth of educational information and podcast information, which is www.acquiracapital.com.
Yeah, and, for those of you who are listening, one of the reasons that I host this podcast, because my job is to find more of the equity side of the investments and being able to find experts in their space, and so for me, this is a first step of getting to know somebody to see, do we want to invest with them in our own fund? I just wanna make it very clear, like, this podcast is the introduction. It's the invitation to start the conversation, an invitation to start the process of due diligence if you would like to invest with somebody. And that's really the beauty of being able to just get out there and network is you're gonna meet a lot of people and you're gonna learn a lot of things. And you may not invest with all of them, but as you're learning, you're gonna be really refining your own buy box, who you're gonna invest with, and looking at these opportunities to sit here and listen to us chit chat for,
Yeah.
45 minutes, 50 minutes, and just be learning a lot. But the real action is when you reach out and you start doing your due diligence on us as individuals and figuring out like, who do I want to invest with? And so I think that it's just important to point out like that there's a process and this is just opening the door of that process. The same way for me in my fund as I'm looking for investments as it would be for you, the listener, as you're looking to diversify your own portfolio. So we encourage you to reach out and network because this is how we get started to get the result at the end. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you spending the time with us. I really appreciate it. I know that your time is very valuable, especially as a passive investor. Sometimes it's the lowest priority on the list, and it should be because it should be passive, right? But
Mhm.
there's some upfront time and due diligence, and I really appreciate you spending that with us and reaching out to us and telling us about your own plans for your own passive income adventures and how we can help you get there. I do not underestimate those of you who spend each week with us listening to our various guests and making this podcast what it is. So thank you so much. And thank you, Joe, for being a part of that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Until next week on our next passive income adventure.